If you were not here Friday, we ended with Jesus in a tomb. And I want to read the rest of the story. Luke chapter 24, beginning at verse 1, says this: On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women, because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. We celebrate today that Jesus, who on Friday was dead in a tomb, is alive. That's what we celebrate today. We're here saying that a dead man has come back to life, and that means something for you and for me. That's what we're here to do today, that this Jesus who claimed to be the Jewish Messiah, who claimed to bring the kingdom of God to earth, this Jesus who was hung on a Roman cross and buried in a grave, this Jesus is alive. He is risen. What I know, however, is that this flies in the face of what we would expect, does it not? I don't know about you. I have never seen someone dead come back to life. Never seen it. There's this idea, you know about confirmation bias? You ever heard this word? Confirmation bias is like this idea that you see what you expect to see. Like the things that you pull out, you pick out the things that tell you what you expected to see. And confirmation bias would tell me that this story that we've read is nonsense. It would tell me that, of course dead people don't come back to life. Of course not. And in the same way, in the first century, it probably felt very similar. Of course this doesn't happen. And so what's true is this message of the resurrection is probably difficult for many of us, if we allowed ourselves to be honest for a minute. Can we be honest in church? Is that okay? Are we allowed to do that? Okay. Have we ever wondered, is this for real? Have we ever had a hard time going, I don't know. I mean, I go to church, I do the Christian thing, but man, a dead guy back to life. There's those of you who have seen the Alpha videos, there's this guy that they asked that question to, and he's like this sort of buff guy, and they ask, did Jesus rise from the dead? He's like, no, it's a myth. Even though I'm Greek Orthodox and we're big on that. This idea that a man who was dead would come back to life would seem hard to believe. Do we actually believe that? One of the things that helps me believe that the scriptures are telling the truth is because they capture things that it would be better if they left out. Have you seen this? In this passage we just read, there's all these things that if you were making a story up, it would be better to leave them out. One of the first ones in the first century is women being the first witnesses. In the first century, the testimony of a woman was almost meaningless. The men believed that women were prone to emotionalism, and so their testimony was suspect. If you were making all of this up, you would say, well, it was the men who found them. But the Bible records that it was women. Why would you say that? It's damaging to your testimony. Why would you say that unless it's true? There's so many things in Scripture that they just account for that seem not helpful. One of these things is just how honest they are. They don't airbrush out the doubts and the uncertainty. Did you catch that in this, what we just read? Did you catch how much uncertainty there is? One of the things that Luke records here is how everybody who shows up is not quite sure what's happening. The women show up, even though that Jesus had told them that he was going to be killed but then raised to life. They show up and he's gone, and they're sort of like, what happened? And it says they wondered what had happened. And then they go back and they tell Peter and the rest of the disciples, and Peter runs off. And before he runs off, they're all sort of discounting the account that the women have brought, that this has happened. And then Peter gets there and he wonders what happened. Do you see this? And what I love about the way that the Bible records this is that they don't airbrush out the things that you would otherwise want out of the story. They just tell it honestly. And it helps me. I don't know if it helps you. It helps me to see that Peter, who ends up being like the apostle, the big dude, right? Peter is like, I don't know what happened. He walks away wondering. It helps me to see this, is how uncertain everybody is right at the outset. Any of you know, I never talk about my kids up here, but I'm going to one time, make one exception. Those of you who are parents, do you know how this works, right? Those of you who are parents, the first one to come tell you and say, he hit me, leaves out what they did to cause the hit, right? Those of you who are parents know, it's like, he hit me, you don't just come down and you're like, okay, there's more to this story. You're leaving out the parts that are not in your favor, right? If you don't have kids, that's how it works. Let me give you some parenting advice. As soon as you have kids and they're able to fight and talk, just don't react to the first one. You got to wait, right? Because they leave out the things in the story that are condemning to them. He hit me. Well, what did you do? Nothing. Have your sister come in here. What happened? Well, he said this and he pushed me and then I hit him and then, right? Isn't this how it works? But we're all prone to this, right? When you get pulled over, not that any of you have ever been pulled over before, but you could imagine somebody ever getting pulled over, and when the cops walk up, what do? You leave out all the parts that actually would get you in trouble. Do you know how fast you were going? No, I think I was going the speed limit. Right? You leave out the things. It was like I was in a hurry and I was going fast and I hoped I wouldn't get caught. You leave out the things. You don't tell the whole story. We're all prone to this. Right? Isn't that what your social media account is? You leave out all the bad stuff and tell everybody the good stuff, don't you? You don't tell the whole story. And yet when we come to the scriptures and the account of the resurrection of Jesus, they tell the whole story. It would be better if they just left out all the doubt. They left out that the women were the first ones to find it. It would be better if they left this stuff out. I don't know if you've read this account recently, but if you skipped over this first little bit and you just pick up at verse 13, it doesn't change that Jesus was resurrected. People still see Jesus. It doesn't change it. Why do they include it? They include it because that's exactly how it happened. The only way that you would do this, or the only reason that you would do this, is because that's how it happened. And you know what I think it does? At least for me, and maybe for you, is I think it lends credibility to the witness that the scriptures are pointing to. Luke had time. By the time Luke actually writes this stuff down and gives it out in written form, there was years. He could have left these things out, but he didn't. And I find great comfort in the fact that the scriptures cover the fact that the foundational witnesses wondered what happened. They weren't triumphant. They weren't, so sure. But I think it does more than that. I think the fact that Luke includes the uncertainty tends to help us get a hold of what it means to struggle to believe in the resurrection of Jesus. What I find in the picture that we see in the book of Luke is that Luke gives voice to the struggles and the doubts that you and I all feel. Have you seen this? Like, we're being honest, right? This is Easter, after all. We're in church. But don't we all at some point go, I don't know how I feel about that. What if I'm wrong? And I think the fact that Luke records this uncertainty helps us figure out our own doubts and our own disbelief. And in a room like this, if we were being honest, there's any number of people who struggle to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. In 2024, as we sit today, one of the biggest things that I have seen in America, there's all kinds of things happening. One of the biggest things that I have seen is this tendency to deconstruct. And what happens when we deconstruct is we start going, well, is there a place in the church for me? Is there a place in the church for people who doubt, who struggle to believe? Is there a place for me as I figure this stuff out? And what I think Luke gives us is, yes, there's a place for you as you struggle. As it's hard to believe, as I look at things that don't make sense, as I look at the world around me, there's a place for me as I try to figure out what it means to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, some of you here would say, I absolutely don't believe that. Some of you are like, well, I'm here because my family dragged me here. Don't point at them. I'm here because mom said I was supposed to go. I'm here because I'm doing a favor to my family. But I don't believe this stuff. And what I think this passage in Luke tells us is that's okay. It's okay that you don't believe that. It gives us firm ground to stand on when we struggle to believe. Friend, if you struggle to believe in the resurrection, you're in good company. If it's difficult for you to believe the resurrection, you are in good company because Peter and the disciples and the first witnesses struggled to believe. You are in good company, and you are so welcome to journey with Jesus here. But there's something else that Luke preserves for us as he writes. I want you to look again with me at verse 5. It says this, it says, in their fright the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again. Then they remembered his words. Now, when the women are struggling to figure out what's happened, the angels call to their memory something that Luke records in chapter 9. I'm going to read this to you, verse 22 of chapter 9. And he, that's Jesus, said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Everyone who was there when Jesus said that, at the beginning in chapter 9, it's the same crew of people who are there in chapter 24. It's the same group of people. They had been told in advance that what was going to happen. And the fact that Luke preserves the struggle of people who had already been given the word of God in advance, and yet they still struggled to believe when they were faced with it, gives grace to all of us who know what we're supposed to believe and yet struggle to believe it. It gives grace and space to every one of us who have a hard time. We maybe have read the Bible, we have been in worship experiences, we've sat under enough teaching to know what we're supposed to believe, And when pressed, we will say the right things, but deep down we go, I don't know how I feel about that. The fact that Luke records that the people who knew about this in advance also struggled gives grace to everyone in this room who has been in church for a long time, who has read the scriptures, who has been taught, and yet still struggles to believe. There's grace for you. And Jesus invites you to walk with him as he helps you discover what it means to believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. There's grace for you. Even though you know what you're supposed to say, it's okay that you struggle. There's grace for you. But there's even more than that. Luke preserves something else in here. I want you to notice specifically who it is that's struggling with the resurrection. Verse 10 says, it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. There's a guy named Richard Bauckham. He wrote a book called Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. It's a big book. If you want to read something for the next 9 months, it'd be a great book for you to get. The cost of the book is significant. It would take you a while, but it's a fantastic book. Richard Bauckham writes, having studied all of this deeply, he says that in the 24 account where he accounts for the women, Luke is using this principle that we're establishing every fact based on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And so Luke records 3 witnesses. He records 3 names: Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and then he lumps in a whole bunch of other women. It says the others who were with them. Whole bunch of women. But here were 3 of the names. But Richard Bauckham says when you get back to Luke chapter 8, where we're introduced to some of these folks, he does the same thing. Luke chapter 8, verse 1 says this: after this, Jesus traveled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women, pay attention to this, who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary called Magdalene, that's the same woman, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chusa, another one, the manager of Herod's household. And then here's a different name, Susanna, and many others. And many others is Luke saying, and all the other ones, right? All these other women. And what Richard Bauckham says is that these are very likely the same group of women in chapter 8 and in chapter 24. These are the same women. Now here's what I want you to see. What Luke says in chapter 8 is, in verse 2, also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary had 7 demons cast out of her. So these same women who had come into a direct personal encounter with the presence and power of Jesus, who had had their lives radically altered. Mary with 7 demons come out. She is a different person. These other women had experienced healing and deliverance, and yet we get to chapter 24, and they wonder what happened. And Luke preserves this, and I think it says something to all of us who have had a personal experience of the power of God and struggle to believe. That maybe we've been healed. We've personally seen healing in our body because of Jesus. Maybe we've been delivered from demonic oppression. We've seen God come through on our behalf powerfully. There was the time when we didn't have any resources and the bills were due, and then God sent us a check. We've seen God do powerful things, and yet we struggle to believe. And if that's you, you've experienced the presence and the power of God in a very tangible and powerful way, and yet you struggle to believe. Luke includes you, and he says there's grace for you. There's grace for you and for your doubt and for your struggle to believe. There's a place for you, and Jesus welcomes you to figure out what you believe as he walks with you. There's a place for you. What typically happens in those spaces is we just bury ourselves in shame, right? Like, oh gosh, I mean, who am I? I got healed, or I got something happened, and yet I still struggle. And we just sort of condemn ourselves. I shouldn't feel this way. But we do. And because Luke includes this, there's a place for you to struggle. And it's okay. And there's grace for you to walk with Jesus as you figure it out. It's good news, but there's something even better. I feel like the guy saying, but wait, there's more. There's something even better here. Verse 12. Maybe not better, different. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened. If you don't know the story of Peter, Peter gets this front row seat. He's sort of like top dog when it comes to the ministry partners of Jesus. You know, he's the one that makes the big declaration, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." He's the first one to make the declaration. Early on in all of the gospel accounts, Peter's one of the ones that gets sent out to cast out demons and to heal the sick and to raise the dead. Peter had participated hands-on in the ministry of Jesus. Peter had seen the power of God come through his hands in seeing people healed. And yet Peter gets to 24 and he wonders what happens. And Luke includes this, I think, because for everyone who has participated in ministry of any sort and yet struggles to believe. Maybe you were trying to share your faith with someone. Maybe you were trying to pray for healing for someone and it just didn't happen. You prayed for someone and they died. You were praying for your family member and your friends to come to faith and they didn't ever come to faith. You were leading a small group and yet you struggled with the things that you were teaching. Maybe you're a pastor now or you have been a pastor and you have preached the good news of Jesus and you yourself struggle to believe that God actually loves you even though he loves everyone else. You struggle with faith even though you have participated in the ministry of Jesus, and Luke includes this to say, it's okay that you struggle to believe because Peter struggled to believe. There's grace for you. Anyone who has ever been in any sort of Christian leadership knows this. That there's something about leading people that you always feel a little bit like unsure. I'm always like, I know this is true for everyone else, but I'm not sure God will do it for me. The amount of times that I have told people, many of you in this room, that God will heal people, and yet I have laid hands on people and prayed for them, and nothing happens. There's a kind of doubt that comes into Christian leaders precisely because they're proclaiming the good news of Jesus. And Luke says it's okay that you struggle to believe. It's okay for you to sort out what you believe as you walk with Jesus. If you are someone who has been part of the ministry of Jesus and you struggle with faith, there's a spot for you. There's a place for you. There's grace for you to walk with Jesus as you figure it out. Luke wants you to know that you are not a failure just because you struggle to believe. That Jesus can still make something of what you do. For everyone who struggles to believe, Jesus invites you to walk with him and to discover again, or maybe for the first time, that it's true. Jesus has been raised. I'm so thankful that the Bible includes stories that show the major figures in their times of doubt and struggle. Because what it says is, I can trust this. I can believe this too. There's a path for me. One of the reasons it's helpful is because when you see these other people who struggle to believe and struggle to have faith, and then you see them encounter the risen Jesus, and then you see the way that their lives have been radically altered afterwards, it gives you a model or a picture that you can hold on to in your own struggle. The fact that we've watched Peter walk from, I don't know what's happened, to being bold for Jesus says, I too can hold on to this. there's a path for me. There's a way forward for me. You know, one of the things that's interesting, I have seen, we believe that women can do anything that men can do in the church. It's one of the beliefs that we hold. But one of the things that happens is that many women have never seen another woman lead powerfully in front of people. They need a model to follow. They need someone that they can look up to and say, that's how I do it. And what all of these early Christian leaders show us is a model for that's how you walk out of doubt. It's how you walk out of struggle to believe and into faith and boldness. That's how you do it. They give us a pattern and a model. And it gives us a path to walk out of our doubts. It's really hard to be stuck in a space of deconstruction and disbelief. Feeling immobilized, feeling like things will never get better, things will never change, and I don't even have steps forward. But when I look at the New Testament, what I see is people like Jesus leading Peter out of doubt into faith. I see Jesus leading Mary Magdalene out of doubt into faith. And I have models to say, I can follow that. I too can meet Jesus and walk out of doubt. Friend, you may find yourself here today struggling in all kinds of ways. You have relational issues. You have things that are broken down in your family. You have things that have broken down at work. You have all kinds of struggles. You have insecurities. You have anxieties. You may be struggling with your own health. You may be struggling with your marriage. You may be struggling with your kids. You may be struggling in all kinds of ways. And you come here today burned out, broken down, beaten up, and you find yourself struggling to keep your head above water. And I know that describes so many of us. And when we think about faith, we go, I don't really even know the way forward. Friend, the invitation to you today is to walk the path of Peter, to walk the path of the disciples and the women who were at the tomb. For them, it was an encounter with Jesus that changed everything. It was an encounter with the risen Jesus that changed everything. You don't have to have it all together today. You need only be open to an encounter with the risen Jesus. If you find yourself in that place, in the place of struggle, and you're not sure how you're going to go forward, would you open yourself to an encounter with the risen Jesus? Here's why this matters so much. On Good Friday, nobody knew that Jesus' death accomplished what it did. That's what we talked about on Friday. At the end of Good Friday, everyone who had been following Jesus just was a little bit upset that we had a very promising Messiah. Could be the guy. He was very promising. He was very skillful. He was very able. And yet at the end, he was dead. And there was doubt and sadness and despair. But what happened on that Good Friday is that Jesus broke the power of all the things that hold human beings captive. Jesus broke the power of darkness. Jesus broke the power of sin. He broke the power of fear. He broke the power of insecurity. He broke the power of anxiety. All of those things were broken on Friday. And on Sunday, what we discovered was that not only did Jesus break all of those powers, Jesus broke the power of death. That none of these things have to hold you. You are able to be set free. Jesus has done the work. The resurrection of Jesus means the things that hold you captive have been dealt with. It's done. You can be set free from the things that hold you. N.T. Wright says this. He says, the monsters that loom so large and that can indeed do serious damage from time to time are hollow inside. The idolatry and sin that gave them their energy and puffed them up with pride has been cut off at the root with the forgiveness of sins. All these things that you face, that you brought in here, all of the disconnects and the fear and the anxiety, the insecurity, the jealousy, the envy, all the things that you brought in with you, even though they look so big, N.T. Wright says they're hollow inside because Jesus has defeated them all. And you can be set free. You can be set free. There is hope for your life. The things that hold you don't have to hold you any longer. You can be set free to hope. You can be set free from fear, from insecurity. And in the resurrected Jesus, you can find freedom. You can find life. You can find hope. You can find promise. You can find purpose. Because Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive.